On this episode of China Uncensored, guys, they're on to us. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. I want to talk to my American viewers for a minute. Americans, meet me over at camera. Okay, there's one camera. Okay, Americans, this is bad news. Our cover's been blown. All of that hard work our government did was for naught. The Chinese people know the truth about who's really behind the Hong Kong protests. Take a look at this.
我们之前一直在北京有看新闻嘛，就觉得应当是大学生们受到了一些美国呀或者其他政府的一些鼓动来做出这种行为，对。那你们支不支持？不支持，当然不支持啦。交通都对啊。
They know! They've somehow uncovered the American government's plot to interfere in China's internal affairs by fomenting a student protest movement to obstruct traffic in Hong Kong. And if you think these are just two incredibly smart and politically savvy young women, and that the average mainlander doesn't know about our incredibly hostile and black-handed plan to destroy Hong Kong from within, you'd be wrong. Mainlanders interviewed by several media organizations blamed the protests on either foreign forces or directly named America as responsible for manipulating students. In fact, the New York Times devoted 2 entire articles to the topic. How did they discover that America was behind this malicious attack against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the People's Republic of China? How did they find out about the ulterior motives of us anti-Chinese Western forces?
受的是西方国家在全球推行颜色革命的外在影响。
Blast! Foiled again by CCTV's crack investigative reporting. You see, after days of not reporting on Hong Kong protests, state-run media have suddenly discovered that the protests were caused by Western imperialist forces. I mean, there's even an anonymous infographic about it circulating on the internet. What more proof could you need? That's why CCTV's flagship evening news program gave the infographic in-depth coverage. And it's not just CCTV. In the last week, state-run media have been filled with articles and opinion pieces condemning the black hands and hostile forces behind the Hong Kong protests. And it goes all the way to the top of the propaganda apparatus. Last Friday, the overseas edition of the People's Daily published an official editorial accusing the U.S. of manipulating Occupy Central in an attempt to start a color revolution. Chinese authorities are a bit obsessed with color revolutions such as the Arab Spring in 2011 or the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, which they frame as destabilizing protests aimed at overthrowing governments. According to People's Daily, American nonprofit organizations are obviously working with the U.S. government to undermine the political situation in Hong Kong. And you know who else is in on it? The Western media. Just by reporting on the protests and referring to them as the Umbrella Revolution, a sure sign of guilt. The editorial ends with this. The U.S. may enjoy the sweet taste of interfering in other countries' internal affairs, but on the issue of Hong Kong, it stands little chance of overcoming the determination of the Chinese government to maintain stability and prosperity. The sweet, sweet taste of interfering in internal affairs. But the foreign hostile forces angle is only one type of propaganda story that Chinese media are churning out. According to an analysis by the China Media Project, there are 4 broad categories. The grave economic costs of the protests, the foreign conspiracies behind the protests, how the protests are an assault on the rule of law and causing creeping chaos, and last but not least, no one really cares about the protests anymore, so they're going back to class. So, mainland Chinese are being told that the Hong Kong protests are unlawful, chaotic riots manipulated by foreign forces to bring economic catastrophe to Hong Kong that no one is really participating in anymore anyway. And let's not forget about how the protests are obstructing traffic. This news report aired on CCTV last Thursday about how school buses had to leave a half-hour early to get kids to preschool on time because of traffic obstructions. Look at those cute little faces. How could Hong Kong protesters be so cruel? And let's not forget America. The report also managed to once again blame the protests on the malicious manipulation of external forces. But my personal favorite is this video commentary released by Xinhua News Agency, the CCP's official mouthpiece, released this Monday. It's called The Black Hands Behind Occupy Central. I'll give you one guess as to who those black hands are. The video says that the U.S. has, quote, engaged in substantial interventionist activities in Hong Kong. It accuses the U.S. government of training Hong Kong students how to protest. It also portrays the students as slackers who goof around, play mahjong, and eat hot pot on the streets of Hong Kong while ignoring the pain and suffering of ordinary Hong Kongers. The video ends with a dire warning that people must maintain vigilance against the troublemaking black hands behind the protests. So, is this propaganda working? It's hard to say, although the majority of mainland Chinese interviewed by the evil Western media seem to have a negative reaction to the Hong Kong protests, bringing up the illegal nature of the protests, the obstruction of traffic, and the manipulation by external forces. There are people who are supportive or sympathetic towards the Hong Kong protesters. Many of them are afraid to say so under their own names. Dozens of mainland Chinese activists who have publicly supported the protests have been arrested. And China's heavy online censorship means that any supportive comments about the protests are quickly deleted, making it hard to tell how much sympathy there is for Hong Kong. But one thing is pretty clear. A lot of people who speak out against the Hong Kong protests are using the exact same language as state-run media. And that shows how successful the Communist Party's propaganda and censorship system still is. And that's why we here at China Uncensored are going to continue uncensoring China. Thanks for watching this episode. I'm Chris Chappell. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and continue interfering in China's internal affairs. I think it's time for some hot pot.